Good morning, friends, and welcome to another episode of Wandering Toward Wonder. I think we're at week 32, which is as wild to me as it probably sounds like it is to you. I'm so glad to be with you today. My name is Will Ed Green, and I serve as an associate pastor and the director of discipleship at Foundry United Methodist Church right here in Washington, D.C. I'm tuning in today from my home here in Brightwood Park, a neighborhood in the northwest part of DC. And, whether you're joining now or you're watching a little later, I would love to know where you're watching from too. So, as I invite you to every week, drop me a line in the comment section and let me know where you're wandering in from today if you'd like. I also want to throw out there this morning that if you're joining me for the first time or are a regular participant, I would love to know where it is you're finding wonder as fall wraps itself around us in these weeks. If you found a place or a space or a relationship lately that's been giving you a sense of joy or freedom or deep curiosity and are comfortable sharing it with us, leave that as a gift in the comments section too. Wonder is one of those things that is best cultivated, I think, in community. And I know that somewhere out there is someone who needs the wisdom your perception of the world can give them. So today I want to talk a little bit about resurrection. If you joined me last week, you'll know we spent some time together thinking about grief, and particularly our tendency to avoid it and the liberation that comes with it when we name grief for what it is. Now, I don't know about you, but as I have watched our nation wrestle with images of lethal political grandstanding and selfish, self centered ambition, I found that the practice of naming not just my rage, which is real, but my grief, that is my sorrow and my pain at the ways we continue to harm one another, really has been liberating. I continue to recognize following our reflection together last week the tendency I've got, maybe you've got this too, to want to hide my grief behind the righteous indignation at what's going on and rage and frustration. I have a tendency to want to hide it behind this fix it mode mentality that actually keeps me from both healing and from fruitfully participating in what God has called me to do in the work of kingdom building. This work of confronting, of naming, of owning our grief, this thing that we do is a work of liberation. And that liberation of confessing what grieves me gives me the power, with God's help, to both heal from the grief and avoid some of the behaviors that give my grief the power to dictate how I live my daily life. And what I mean by that is this. Imagine in some Groundhog Day like world, not that those are too hard to imagine these days, you have to reread a hurtful text exchange with a friend or rewatch a video of you doing something that you wish you hadn't done that hurt other people over and over and over again. When we don't confront or own or name our own grief, or when we hide it behind other behaviors, it's kind of like we're letting it play over and over in the background of our lives rather than naming it so that we can grieve and let it go, right? It's like letting it have the power to continue to shape how we show up. And I believe that part of this work of confronting grief and sorrow is about stopping the cycle so we can move past what it is we've experienced. And as I said last week, I'm convinced that Jesus' demand that we not avoid but confront the grief and sorrow embodied by the cross was and is an invitation to remember that God goes with us through the grief and leads us, even when we can't see the way, through it toward a hope of resurrection. Now, I've said all those things. They sound pretty great, right? But, as I've been sitting with this reflection this week and thinking about that promise of resurrection, I have got to be honest in saying that I've kind of wrestled with it a little bit. Resurrection has this tendency in me, perhaps because it's embodied best in stained glass story, of these images of a rosy-cheeked Savior rising from the tomb, Starbucks in hand with his dancing shoes on, ready to face the day, right? That's what we think about when we think about resurrection. And quite frankly, that image just hasn't been working for me. After these last 8 months of up and down and back and forth in WTF, and would you look at that dumpster fire? Oh my goodness, all the dumpsters are on fire. The journey of confronting grief, of giving it space and being honest with it and myself, really has just plain wore me out. Now, don't get me wrong. I believe it's important work, and I definitely want to be that rosy cheeked, resurrected, and revived person ready to face the world with a renewed sense of vigor. Don't we all? But more often than not, I roll up on those resurrection moments having confronted my grief, looking like I just rolled out of bed. Droopy eyed, incapable of much more than hand gestures and grunts to communicate, and hair that would make even the most well coiffed swamp witch jealous. The truth of the matter is that in this dress for success, fake it till you make it, put your best foot forward world, I think we've got this tendency to treat the promise of healing or the hope of resurrection like it's an all or nothing kind of thing, right? Like if we don't come out the other side of what we're grieving looking like we've left a 5-day spa retreat, then by golly, we're going to make everybody else think we have. And that, at least for me, as I've continued to reflect, on the moments that we're living in, on this work of grieving, on this promise of resurrection, is not what resurrection is really about. It's not the kind of healing and wholeness and authenticity Christ offers to us or calls us to embody. This fake it till you make it kind of way of being part of the resurrection work of God and the world is really just a performance that prolongs our hurting and prevents us from reclaiming the promise that all of us, even the bedraggled, beat down, bruised parts, are beloved of God. Many weeks ago, I shared a quote by Frederick Buechner that my colleague, Pastor KC, recalled early in the pandemic. It's a long one, but a good one, and I'd like to share it again with you now. He's speaking about resurrection and our tendency to prefer rosy-cheeked Jesus over the Christ who was crucified. And about this tendency, he writes that crucifixion is a part of our story, and goes on to say, yet we're raised up nonetheless. We're raised up, and we have to tell of that too, that part of the story, that in spite of every reason to give the whole show up, we're here still just able to hope. In spite of all the griefs and failures we've known, we're here still able just to rejoice. In spite of the darkness we flirt with, we are still just a little, at least, in love with light. By miracle, we survive even our own shabbiness, and for the time being, maybe that's resurrection enough. That phrase has stuck with me. Maybe that's resurrection enough. What if, friends, what if, instead of expecting that resurrection looks like perfection in healing, attitude, orientation, or relationships, what if, instead of looking like absolute acceptance of everything that has happened or everything that will happen, resurrection is just about trusting that on the other side of whatever it is we're going through, no matter how shabby we feel, no matter how worn out we are, no matter how big the circles under our eyes, no matter the fact that the scar tissue of the battles we fought will continue to catch and pull and remind us of wounds long healed over, what if resurrection is just about the fact that we've survived? What if survival in these days, when perfection, which was never possible in the first place, is certainly not possible now, what if survival is resurrection enough? Because we know that we've come through. Because we've seen that God has been faithful despite it all. And because we know that God's love doesn't require that we've got ourselves pulled together, that we've got it all figured out, that we're the perfect parent as we try to manage the realities of online learning, or the perfect caregiver as we're trying to be present to parents far away, or the perfect pastor, or the perfect employee. What if this survival is enough, because we know that God's love only requires that we keep showing up? how would that change your life? How would that change your understanding of resurrection? How would that change the way that you treated yourself in this work of trying to be who God has called you to be? Yesterday, I was visiting with a member of the church about the struggle and strain of these days, and we were just lamenting in many ways some of the pain and sorrow and the persistence and pervasiveness of all the stuff that's going on. And I shared this Buechner quote, and then this person started belly laughing. I mean, just it sounded like they dropped the phone belly laughing. It was the best laugh I've heard really since the pandemic started. And they said, the image that just popped into my head is of Jesus rolling out of the tomb, beat up and smelling like 3 days of BO. And that got me tickled. And we went back and forth kind of enfleshing this vision of a resurrected Jesus who wasn't rosy-cheeked, surrounded by lilies and singing birds like some Snow White-esque character out of a Disney movie, but a Jesus who had just come out of 3 days in the tomb after having been crucified. Beat up, beat down, tired and weary, and yet ready to do the work that laid ahead. A Jesus who, despite it all, because of his deep love, continued to show up. Now that's the kind of resurrection I can be in solidarity with right now. That's the kind of image of new life that makes the most sense to me. Because I know that 9 times out of 10, I'm going to wake up feeling a little beat down and beat up and weary. I'm going to guess that's probably true for you too. And yet I know that the same Jesus who has called me to do the hard work of living into the reality of grief, of confronting suffering, of naming the stuff that I need, is standing right there with me, in solidarity with me, leading me toward a resurrection which more fully embodies with each new day renewed life and hope. As we keep wandering through these days together, friends, I want you to be gentle enough with yourselves to know that when you rise each day, you need not be rosy-cheeked or well put together. You need not have it all figured out. You need not have anything figured out at all. You need only be what you already are, a beloved child of God. And whether you wake up having done all this work and done all this stuff and continued to push through, rosy-cheeked and surrounded by singing birds, or beat down and bedraggled, remember that all of who you are, all of who we are, is beloved of God. And if you've survived, that's resurrection enough. In the coming days, friends, we'll be pivoting Wandering Toward Wonder slightly to include a number of new ways of cultivating wonder. And so as we continue to think about all those ways that we're finding wonder in the world, I would love to know if you've got questions that you'd like to explore together about spiritual practices, disciplines, theology, church history, any of it. Bring it all. You can email it to me at wgreen@foundryumc.org. You can leave it in our chat if you're comfortable doing that. And what I hope to be able to do is to carve out a little time each week where we can just be in some dynamic conversation together about those questions that you've got. That may look like inviting a guest to join me. That may look like having a church member come and share their story. It may look like us doing some Bible study together. But I hope as those questions continue to kind of come up for you that you'll let me know, so that we can cultivate a space together these Tuesdays in which we're all growing that sense of wonder in our lives and in the world. As always, I want to remind you that we have a newsletter that comes out weekly on Tuesdays called Connections. It's a great way to stay connected to all the various things that are going on in the life of the church. That will be posted on Facebook starting in November at 5 o'clock. We're going to pause briefly as we live into this really exciting stewardship campaign that we're in, but you are able to receive it in your inboxes. And so if you will go to https://bit.ly/Foundry Connections. We're going to drop that in the chat. You'll be able to register to receive that in your inboxes so that you can stay connected to all of the wonderful things that Foundry is up to in these days. And we also want to make sure that you continue to avail yourself of all of these offerings from our pastors throughout the week. Pastor Ginger will be with you tomorrow here live on Facebook at noon for Ponderings from the Purple Parlor. That's a tongue twister, isn't it? And I hope that you'll receive the gift that is. And as we go out into the rest of the day, as I always say, remember, be gentle with yourselves. Know that God loves you. Know that I love you. And keep on finding ways, friends, no matter what it takes, to wander toward wonder. Till next time, take care. Goodbye.